Hi, I'm Andrew from the New South Wales Irrigators Council. Thanks for watching. This is a quick presentation on why we think the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is bad policy on a bad framework, no matter what it is that it eventually says. In 2004, the Murray-Darling Basin states and the Commonwealth Government signed up to a contract known as the National Water Initiative. That initiative agreed that each of the states and the Commonwealth would work towards a triple bottom line approach of environmental, social and economic outcomes from the Murray-Darling Basin's water resources. That National Water Initiative eventually transpired to become the Water Act, an act of the Federal Parliament which in its objects contains those same three outcomes: environmental, social and economic. Had that been the case, that the triple bottom line approach was what was underpinned in the Basin Plan, then irrigators and the communities that they live in would have been satisfied. Unfortunately, that's not what occurred. If you look at the balance of the Water Act, what you'll see the outcomes are is this: environmental, environmental and environmental. Now don't get me wrong, we don't argue that the environment is not important. In fact, the environment, even at its basest level, delivers our primary asset, the water that we use on our farms, and we live in and amongst that environment. The environment's important, but so too are the social and economic outcomes, and that unfortunately is not being addressed in the Basin Plan. So how did we get to this? The answer is quite simply political. When the National Water Initiative was signed in 2004, each of the states was governed by a Labor government, and in Canberra was a coalition government. So naturally you would expect that there was some tension between those groups of political parties. As we moved closer towards a federal election, unfortunately politics got in the way and one of the states withdrew from the National Water Initiative and the move towards a comprehensive plan that addressed the triple bottom line outcomes. Once one of those states had been removed from the process, and the others naturally followed suit, and we ended up with a Commonwealth Government who had to find a way to do this by themselves. What they found was the external affairs power in the Australian Constitution. Having found that, they then looked for international treaties and conventions. The only international treaties and conventions that they could find, obviously, were environmental in nature, and that's where the Ramsar Convention comes into this, and the Convention on the Protection of Resting Zones for Migratory Bird Species. With only international conventions based on environmental outcomes that the Commonwealth had available to it to create the capacity to make the Water Act, obviously the balance of the Water Act was solely about that outcome, and the social and economic outcomes couldn't and aren't being considered as part of this whole process. That's why we've got a problem with it. Here's an interesting question then: how do we fix it? Well, the answer's pretty simple. The Murray-Darling Basin Authority are coming up with a range within which environmental assets can exist based on a level of cut. So if you have a look at this graphic, you'll see that the level of cut is adjusted on this axis. The lower the level of cut, the red area is greatest in terms of environmental asset health. The higher the level of cut, then obviously the healthier the environmental asset will turn out to be. What we've asked of the Commonwealth Government, and we ask of the authority, is that the triple bottom line approach be approached in exactly the same way. That is, economic assets be assessed and social fabric be assessed on the same scales and in the same fashion as environmental assets. Obviously though, they're inverse. The lower the level of cut, the healthier the economic asset, and the lower the level of cut, the healthier the social fabric of those communities across the Murray-Darling Basin. If you've got all three on the same scale, then you can look for a point of intersection. The problem at the moment is the way the sustainable diversion limit is proposed in the Water Act is that it must sit here at a level of cut where the environmental asset is at its healthiest. The problem is that that means that you're well above the capacity for the economic asset to continue to exist, and the same for the social fabric. You've closed the communities, you've closed the family farms, and you've shut down the social fabric of everything west of Sydney. What we've asked is that this all be presented on the same scale so that we can assess a point of intersection, so that we can have a genuine triple bottom line approach to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. If Minister Burke chooses to take that advice, then I think you'll find that people across the basin will be satisfied. Thanks very much for watching.